Good morning. Today, Senator Lieberman and I are here to call attention to what I'd like to refer to as the irresponsible and reckless fiscal path we find ourselves as a nation, and to urge our colleagues to act now to take the first step toward meaningful, comprehensive tax and entitlement reform. You know, when I came to the Senate in 1999, the gross federal debt was $5.6 trillion. CBO now predicts that it's going to be $12.7 trillion. And what that means is that we've gone to a situation where back in 1999, our debt was about 60% of our GDP. Now it's, as this chart shows, almost 90%. That's a 50% increase in the national debt during that period of time. And one of the things that people fail to realize, and I was very proud, it was in '99 we had the first reduction in the we had a balanced budget, and we reduced debt by $1 billion. And then in 2000, we reduced debt by about $285 billion. And then when 9/11 hit, Katie barred the door. We started going the other direction. At that time, the average citizen owed about $30,000. Today, it's, or I'm sorry, $20,000. Today, it's a little over $30,000. So that's each individual in this country. Every new babies tomorrow being born, they come, welcome to the United States of America. Your gift is you've got a debt of over $30,000. The other interesting thing is CBO has now said that the deficit, for the budget, the deficit, not the net debt, the deficit is going to be $1.7 trillion. And we had a meeting of appropriations last week, and I pointed out that it's going to be more than $1.7 trillion. If you take in the supplemental and you take in the fact that we're using the trust funds, it's going to be over $2 trillion. In terms of our gross domestic product, in terms of the deficit, we have not had that kind of a deficit since the Second World War. So we're really in very tough situation today. And the thing about it is that when you test the American people and find out how they feel, they're, first of all, worried about the economy and their jobs, but they're very, very uneasy about this fiscal course that we're on, and this borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. And in fact, a poll was done by the Peterson Foundation, a McInturf poll, and showed that next to the economy, the greatest concern Americans had was this business about borrowing money and what the future is going to hold for them and for their children. And so Senator Lieberman and I have come up with another iteration of Saving America's Future Economy. It sets up a 18-member commission. The commission is going to meet for about a year. They're going to come back with recommendations on tax reform and entitlement reform. And their recommendations, assuming they get 13 out of 18 votes, will be put in an expedited procedure. We'll just run it to the House and Senate, and there's going to be a vote up or down like we have with BRAC, understanding that if you try to do this thing through the regular order, you know what? It's never going to get done. And so I'm just really pleased that Senator Lieberman and I have come together. We both know from the bipartisan group that Senator Lieberman and Lamar Alexander have put together that there's a tremendous support for this kind of thing on both sides of the aisle. And we're hoping that we're going to be able to gather a lot of sponsors for this bill, as they have for this same kind of a bill over in the House, and get something done. And I think that what we ought to realize is this. The world is looking at us. I'll never forget last year I went to the U.S.-Canadian Interparliamentary, and I sat down with one of the two most liberal members of the Canadian Parliament, and they looked at me and said, "You guys are crazy." He said, "It's now part of our DNA. We bit the bullet. We balance our budgets. We're fiscally responsible. You are not fiscally responsible." And I'm going to tell you something. Even though we got this avalanche of other problems, if we don't deal with entitlements and we don't deal with tax reform, we're going to destroy our credibility and our credit in the world. And you'll see our interest rates. You know, talk to Bernanke, he'll tell you about it. If we don't do this, you'll see our interest rates skyrocket. And worst of all, our children and grandchildren will not forgive us for being fiscally irresponsible. Senator Lieberman, thank you very much for being a part of this team, and we're going to make it happen.
Yes, we are, George.
Yeah.
Thank you. I am really glad to be joining Senator Voinovich this morning. This is the beginning of something very important. Matter of fact, we will have a special medal for all of you who are here this morning to see the start of this, because we're going to look back on it and say that something significant started here, that it was in the interest of our country, our children, and our grandchildren. The fact is that as tough as our current economic recession has been, we have an even greater long-term economic crisis looming, and that is caused by the unsustainable, humongous national debt that we are building up and that Senator Voinovich has just documented. To deal with that problem in the short-term spending, good disciplines like pay-as-you-go will certainly help. But we've got to address entitlements in addition to the regular discretionary spending if we're going to get control of these long-term shortfalls, which really do threaten to undermine our economy and make impossible our dreams for a better future. That's the reason I'm so glad to be joining George in this Safe Commission Act. And I join with a real sense of purpose and priority, which I know I share with him. This matters to us, and we're going to really stay on top of it until we get it done. The structural problems facing our economy have been years in the making and can't be solved without systemic changes in our so-called entitlement programs. These entitlements and other mandatory spending, such as interest on the national debt, are just plain squeezing out all other spending, and before long will make it impossible for us to satisfy our constitutional responsibilities to provide for the common defense and promote the general welfare. There's just not going to be any money left. Currently, spending on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid and net interest consume nearly half of all federal spending. According to a 2008 GAO analysis, by 2030, which is not so far away, 21 years from now, spending on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid and net interest will by themselves exceed all revenues coming into the federal government. There won't be anything left for anything else. The annual surplus in the Social Security Trust Fund is going to evaporate in 2017, just 8 years from now. And the trust fund surpluses will be totally depleted in 2041. If we don't take action, by law, therefore, we will be required to begin to reduce Social Security benefits. According to the 2008 Social Security Trustees Report, the 75-year actuarial deficit of the Social Security Fund is $4.3 trillion in present value terms, and that number is just going to get greater so long as we don't do anything. This year, Medicare's Hospital Insurance Trust Fund is expected to pay out more in hospital benefits and other expenditures than it receives in Medicare taxes and other dedicated revenues. That means that the difference has to be made up from general revenues, and that means that the deficit and the long-term debt will continue to grow. This is not obviously a Democratic or Republican problem. This really is an American problem, and therefore all Americans, particularly those of us who are privileged to serve in positions of leadership in our national government, have to come together to solve this crisis. But this is also, as Senator Voinovich said, intensely difficult to do in the normal governmental, congressional, political process. The fact is, if it was any easier, we would have done it already, because all of us know how important it is to solve this problem. We need the kind of special commission this legislation would create. And as George said, there are some good recent examples of such special commissions with fast-track procedures enabling us to make major progress on particularly important but politically difficult issues. Social Security reform during the Reagan administration is one. and the base closing commissions are another. We need the same bipartisan, national interest first approach to the long-term debt that's strapping our country. Only by agreeing to a process that encourages nonpartisanship will we make progress on an issue that really threatens to undermine the future of our country and the prosperity of our families and our people. This is a problem that's not going to wait. It's getting worse every day. We've got to act now, and that's why the establishment of a bipartisan commission whose recommendations will be considered in Congress under fast-track procedures is the best way to put this enormous problem behind us and create a foundation for long-term, robust national economic growth. Thank you, and we'll be glad to take your questions now.